You know, the military-industrial complex is a disaster, just like my makeup. Welcome to Superhero Rundown. I am Crimson, and today we're going to examine Michael Bay's Transformers and the wonders of the military-industrial complex. And for those of you who don't know what that is, oh boy, are you in for a fun. I watched 3.5 of these movies, and I say half for transparency. I never saw the cartoon either, so I'm in the dark here. I'm not going to tell you how the plot works or if it makes sense. No, if you want that, you can go watch the numerous people who have already covered it. Today we'll be looking at the military-industrial complex and why Michael Bay is the worst for indulging it. Now, if you've served, all power to you. I certainly can't do it, and I do have friends who have served and are super messed up by their tours or are actually still in the military now. This is not meant to call anyone out who has served because of money or honor or what have you. This is meant to call out the system that has basically been running our lives since before we had an armistice on the Korean Peninsula, we lost in Vietnam, we lost in Lebanon, we, I guess, sort of won in Bosnia, but not really. We lost in Afghanistan, and that's not even counting our interference in other countries currently. Yeah, for the greatest military on the planet and for spending more than the next 10 countries combined, we've certainly done a lot of losing since the 1950s. So where do we begin? With Dwight D Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander and outgoing president in 1961 as Jack Kennedy was about to take the reins of the White House. Yeah, this is the guy we'll be talking about. He had the Nazi death camps photographed extensively in case of Holocaust denialism, he ended McCarthyism, he wanted strong science education, and he led the nation through a lot of prosperity in the 1950s. Most people consider him a good president. Though every president can be indicted on war crimes, but that's a hot mess that I don't care to talk about ever. My point is that this man warned us about the military-industrial complex, and he was part of the military establishment. He knew what would happen, and did America listen? No, because America never listens. Ever. I said what I said. Have a nice day. In Trump, Ike, and the Myth of the Military-Industrial Complex by Hal Brands, he explains what Eisenhower was so worried about. Eisenhower was worried that America risked becoming a garrison state, a country that was so focused on security that it would inadvertently destroy the economic and political liberties it was waging the Cold War to protect. He believed that an informal alliance between arms manufacturers, the military services, and Congress might bring that outcome about. Eisenhower wasn't entirely off base. It was possible that the specter of total war, or simply a perpetual Cold War, would lead the U.S. toward a more regimented economy and society. During the Korean War, skyrocketing military spending had indeed led to higher taxes and inflation controls, while the government engaged in large-scale industrial planning and severely limited production of consumer goods. So at the end of the day, he feared what we have now. Congress and the military and the arms manufacturers having wars constantly. We are currently in 3 different ongoing conflicts: Somalia, Syria, and Iraq. And those of you who are skeptical, remember when George W. Bush promised that there were weapons of mass destruction to justify his war on terror? Yeah, there were no weapons of mass destruction. Anyway, back to Eisenhower. Dolores E. Janiewski sets the stage for us of what Eisenhower sought to do with his farewell address. Choosing to speak from the Oval Office, Dwight Eisenhower delivered the farewell address to a television and radio audience on January 17, 1961, in a masterful final act of his rhetorical presidency. This speech identified the president and the public as the joint guardians of the national interest in restraining the military-industrial complex. The president counseled Americans to accept the need for a large military infrastructure, oppose profiteering, support international cooperation, and ensure that their chosen representatives possessed the capability to engage in this delicate balancing act. Elected officials must prevent military contractors from seeking excessive profits without endangering market freedoms. Only public vigilance and wise statesmen could balance these contradictory goals while keeping the world from tumbling over the brink into disaster. Conceding that he could not promise his listeners that lasting peace was in sight, Eisenhower told them that happily war had been avoided. Yes, Eisenhower told the people that they need a large military because of the Cold War, and he asked to support international cooperation. But he didn't want the military to practice profiteering, and he wanted to have Congress act as the buffer between the arms manufacturing and the military. So with all this in mind, let's look at Michael Bay's Transformers. First of all, there is a lot to unpack here. No sacrifice, no victory seems to be the Witwicky family motto, and I hate it because it's said a lot. Also, throw out the fact that Bumblebee is a prequel, though I will point out the realest part of that was John Cena saying, "They're called the Decepticons," and then being right. Anyway, the story revolves around Sam Witwicky, his annoying parents who belittle him a lot, and the Transformers, specifically Optimus Prime, who is apparently Jesus, Bumblebee, who is the only character worth giving a shit about, Megatron, who is our villain, and Starscream, who is just a fighter jet who is also a coward, I guess. By the way, the entire time I watched these with my wife, she was seething. She's pretty upset by these movies, but I figure it's with good reason. At some point, the government and the military show up. Now, in the film, there was a military unit who survived the first Decepticon attack. That's who Sam and the Transformers eventually meet up with. They go to a fictional city so the giant robots can fight. I dig giant robots, you dig giant robots. Nice. Long story short, the military provides help to Sam and the Autobots so that they can play keep away with the Allspark, a MacGuffin, with Megatron. But in the end, Sam gets the Allspark, gives it to Megatron, which kills him until he's resurrected in the next movie, I guess. So the next movie is Revenge of the Fallen, and the Autobots are helping the Americans with their interplanetary issues with other countries because of the military-industrial complex. Also, I'm not going to go into this, but American exceptionalism in Transformers is definitely not a hot take, and my god, the collateral damage in this is ridiculous. Thank you, boy. Thank you for agreeing with me. Anyway, the military is trying to convince Optimus Prime to share their advanced weaponry with them, and he's all like, humans are the worst. Which, let's face it, he's right. Also, can we stop treating the US president like he's the be-all, end-all of what happens to the planet? There are other sovereign nations here, you dicks. Anyway, Megatron is resurrected, surprise. The Decepticons fight the Autobots, also surprise, and Optimus Prime is killed in front of Sam. At some point, there's this advisor character, and he tells the humans to stand down when Megatron demands Sam Witwicky. Though I will be frank, when the advisor said, "As the US has always done, we are going to work on a military strategy," and I was like, Vietnam, Afghanistan, any destabilization in South America. So they find an old Decepticon turned Autobot named Jetfire. He tells them about the Fallen and the MacGuffin key matrix of leadership. But apparently the matrix is supposed to be more than a key, but it's supposed to be more like the TARDIS and be able to communicate with the Transformers who came before. I don't know. But none of that matters because Sam is going to bring Optimus back to life, and the military guys who helped him in the first movie are back to help. Anyway, Sam also dies. He speaks to the Primes, and he comes back and revives Optimus with the Matrix MacGuffin Who's-He What's-It. Optimus Prime fights the Fallen and wins on top of the pyramids at Giza. This is a world fucking heritage site. How the fuck are you explaining this to the Egyptian government? No, seriously, how? They never explain that. But we got one more recap because Age of Extinction no longer exists to me because it was that boring. So let's talk about Dark of the Moon. We open with the astronauts in 1969 discovering a MacGuffin on the dark side of the moon. Ha! Anyway, Sam has a new girlfriend because Megan Fox didn't renew her contract, which is good for her, honestly. I've been told that I can't look at spoilers and I must suffer for my art, much like Sam has no job because he saved the world and no one knows. So Optimus Prime revives Leonard Nimoy, the old leader of the Autobots, and he in turn betrays them to help Megatron. Yeah, okay, that's the coolest shot in the entire franchise. So the Decepticons summoned the whole planet of Cybertron to redo the whole Earth with humanity enslaved or whatever. The US demands the Autobots leave. They do, they get blown up, but not really because movies need to be made. In Chicago, the final showdown happens, and the Autobots show up to see Sam and some of the military guys from the previous two movies. They fight because, obviously, Optimus faces Leonard Nimoy and kills him, though he loses an arm in the process. Megatron saves Optimus, but Optimus murders him because he doesn't trust him. The world is saved, and everyone is happy as the Autobots stay on Earth. Now, obviously, I'm just glossing over a bunch of stuff here, but let's talk about the military and Hollywood for a moment. In Hollywood and the Pentagon, a relationship of mutual exploitation, Jamie Tarabay tells us the history of the military and Hollywood. The U.S. military has had a presence in Hollywood since the early 1900s. It's not like there's some surreptitious, hidden, secret propaganda arm, said Todd Bresseal, a retired Army liaison officer who did a tour in the LA office. The Army's been there since Hollywood was first built from the Los Angeles canyons and desert. Obviously, military propaganda is rampant in the Transformers movies. Not only that, but it invokes 9/11. Joshua Clover in Dream Machines elaborates on this. The conflict has come to Earth and gathered up some hapless humans, soldiers, models, Shia LaBeouf. During the epic finale of Urban Conflict, there's a brief shot of the late arriving Decepticon, Starscream, in his mechanical form as a jet, smashing into and blurring through an office tower. We watch from a magical viewpoint, midair outside the office windows. The windows spool past like frames of celluloid. They reveal the interior stuff with impossible detail. Desks, fluttering papers, bodies being tossed asunder, before Starscream blasts out of the building, leaving a defined exit wound. The sequence lasts less than 2 seconds, yet it's by far the most detailed reconstruction of what was hidden from our human eyes within the spectacularly visible violence of September 11, 2001. At the same time, it gets at the kernel of truth within the Transformers franchise and the timeliness of this restoration. No other device so lovingly preserves the boy's dream that every single object in the world is a weapon. Cars, planes, bodies. Car bomb, 9/11, suicide bomber. The fantasy of weaponization is merely the reality of asymmetric warfare, and the story of how it was finally brought to the United States. The movie really should be titled Transformers, or A Brief History of 21st Century Combat. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's why I do video essays. Sometimes you need a critical eye to actually explain some of this hot mess. Amos Barshad did just that in enlisting an audience how Hollywood peddles propaganda, saying, but it's not just that propaganda is being made. It's that most contemporaneous war movies are propaganda. An actual consideration of the wars in which these soldiers are being heroic is not offered, cannot be offered, because our wars today are too ugly and too long and too strange to engage in with any sort of effortless pride. But American propaganda flows forward and will continue to flow forward. The market demands glorious stories of valor. And this is why Transformers looks the way it does. The military vehicles, the soldiers getting attacked by reptilian Decepticons, the Autobots looking more friendly, among other things. They even look more alien than robots. This is, of course, no accident. The U.S. military jumps at the chance to be involved in Hollywood projects and offers up access to all kinds of multi-million-dollar equipment for free if the film suits its taste. Movies like Forrest Gump and Independence Day have had to fake it because the military didn't like its portrayal as inadequate or fumbling. but Transformers was a different story. In fact, Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen was the first film to feature every branch of the military aside from the Coast Guard. So yes, at best it's free advertising, and at worst it is straight up propaganda. But you can't say that viewers aren't getting something out of the deal. Bay knows how to make an A-10 Warthog look badass, which Transformers Without the Robots is just insanely high-budget military porn points out. I don't even know what the hell an A-10 Warthog even looks like. I just thought it was some vehicle in Halo. I'll just briefly explain how we got here with the military-industrial complex. And as far as where we go from here, I mean, there's speculation, but other than that, there's not really a lot one single person can do. How did we get here? So this goes back before Eisenhower. Let's go back to World War I. There was a strong sentiment that the profits of private businesses was the main reason we got involved in the war. In The Origins of the Permanent War Economy by Thomas K. Duncan and Christopher J. Coyne, we learned that, according to this view, the profit from armed conflict accrued mainly to those who used the war to protect their foreign economic interests and those who sold arms and equipment to the government. A deeply anti-business streak entered into American thinking and politics, with the military-industrial leaders being labeled as merchants of death. That hasn't changed, just so everyone knows. Anyway, the Great Depression and World War II was a whole thing that happened with a lot of nuance, but let's just say there was a variety of interest groups that took advantage of the situation and decided to help society by staying at war. Industry with profits, the military, the politicians, and the lobbyists. Hence why the Cold War was fighting the new enemy in the Soviet Union. Not to mention that the Great Depression was so long-lasting that it shook the entire system to the core and called into question how the U.S. economic system even worked. People began to think that capitalism had failed them and that the state was the only way to get what they needed: food, shelter, and money. I mean, I feel that right now. Like, right now. Capitalism as a system is stupid because it only ever helps the rich and makes the poor poorer. And before you start in the comments I won't be reading, the answer to your question is that you're terrible and you should feel bad. Okay, so the war ends, and the military and the war-related private businesses have just experienced a lot of gains, both financially and politically. Duncan and Coyne expressed the sentiment of the late 1940s. Despite popular sentiment for a respite from the war effort, demobilization was short-lived because American military planners were already looking at the Soviet Union as the source of the next crisis with which to exert their influence. The military-industrial complex, with only a short pause to gather its strength, found itself attempting to influence policy against a potential threat that would last for more than 4 decades. And since the events of September 11, 2001, the military-industrial complex has again shifted focus to the transnational war on terror, which has further extended and sustained the permanent war economy. Indeed, as John Mueller shows, an entire terrorism industry consisting of consultants, counter-terrorism experts, and pundits has emerged in the wake of the 9/11 attacks. Not that John Mueller. Different one, just so you know. And then we have Eisenhower's farewell speech where he warns of the issue at hand and, no one listened to the man. We have 3 interventions going on, but it's really wars or conflicts. They just beat around the bush because war sounds bad. We've been involved in a war since I was born in the late 1980s. I have never lived in an era where we were at peace with anyone. And this sentiment of us being the world police is laughable when we can't even take care of our homeless and punish people who are just trying to get by. Duncan and Coyne finish with this. In the context of foreign military interventions, this flaw implies that, given the chance, self-interested capitalists will gladly engage in a mutually beneficial exchange with the state monopoly provider of military services. Private companies offer campaign contributions and political support, and politicians and state bureaucrats offer rents in return. Although both parties are privately made better off, the significant negative externality of allowing this exchange is that the permanent war economy diverts productive resources away from other uses that would improve the general standard of living. And where does that leave us? Well, not a good system, that's for sure. Why are we spending so much money on something that doesn't really help the American people because we feel more secure? Because I watch the Transformers in horror at the glorification of the military. William Pfaff asks a very hard question in Manufacturing Insecurity: How Militarism Endangers America, by asking, "It is time to ask a fundamental question that few government officials or politicians in the United States seem willing to ask. Has it been a terrible error for the United States to have built an all but irreversible worldwide system of more than 1,000 military bases, stations, and outposts? This system was created to enhance U.S. national security, but what if it has actually done the opposite, provoking conflict and creating the very insecurity it was intended to prevent?" We shouldn't be glorifying people who die for us because the government decided to start a war that they didn't ask for. And yes, I am proud of every one of those people who have served, but some never got a choice or took it because they couldn't do anything else. So the next time you look at Michael Bay's Transformers, I hope you realize that he's sucking the dick of America's military-industrial complex, that he's screwing over the American populace, and that at the end of the day, it's not all make-believe.